Good evening, everybody. Dr. Jeff here, and we've got Jim Case with us again as
Good evening, everybody.
One of the partners. And we have a guest tonight, actually our first guest. My son, Luke Smith, is joining us tonight. Want to say hello, Luke?
Hi, good evening.
And we don't have Timothy with us tonight. He is down in Mexico still doing some work down there. And it has been, I believe, at least 2, if not 3 weeks, 2 weeks for sure, since our last podcast we've done. So, life has happened. We are still working on the topic of truth. Working through a workbook that I created a number of years ago called Untwisting the Truth. So the intention of the podcast is certainly not to say we know the truth or we have the truth. We're just creating hopefully entertaining and informative commentary on getting some stimulating topic and dialogue going about what we think is truth and all of that good stuff. So as a segue, working toward finishing up the first of 10 quizzes that we might get through. We aren't going to get through those tonight, but we started in our last podcast working on quiz number 1, and we got through the first 12 questions of 25 that are on the quiz. So perhaps we might finish that up this evening as we push through. Between the last podcast and tonight, and oh, by the way, a little segue here, we are also not meeting in our usual meeting location. We're on a boat tonight, and the 3 of us just got back from taking a little sunset cruise out in the Pacific Ocean, and we just got the boat parked, and the sun is set. The sky just has a little bit of light left in it, and it's very calm and serene here in the harbor tonight. Just a really cool evening. So wherever you are, that's what we got going on, and I hope that you have something similar, if not in actuality, that perhaps you could vicariously experience that through what I'm talking about tonight and through what we got to experience. Had a chance to take a 8-day trip to Bali between the last podcast and tonight, and it was a lovely experience overall. I've had an opportunity to spend about 3 years total time in Asia. It was my first trip to Bali. I find it a lot alike. I guess people could come to the United States, and it's a pretty big place, and people would probably describe it as somewhat similar, maybe in the economy or whatnot. There's, obviously a wide variety of geography and topography, but Asia's, without it sounding prejudicial or judgmental or whatnot, my experience of Asia is there's not a wide range of difference. That's not good or bad. That's just my experience. But what I wanted to talk about tonight with regard to truth was some of the books that I read and discussions I had and interactions I had, ceremonies I witnessed, temples I went to, in looking at how the Balinese perceive truth, and some of the other influences that have trickled down in their history as a country or as a territory in the world of what they believe and how all that came about. The thing that I was most astounded by is the sense of community that they live in, and that they, on average, will spend half of their annual income, which is a big number. Imagine half of whatever you make going to a specific task, and the task here for them is how they practice their religion. Half of their income is, you may say, well, what in the world are they spending that on? It is in the costumes that they wear for the ceremonies they have. It is in the ornamentation of everything they do ceremonially. It is in the offerings and the sacrifices that they make daily to the gods that they worship, in the form of food and plants and vegetables and animals and little baskets and flowers, in the way that they do their cremation ceremonies, their burial ceremonies. It's quite elaborate, and it involves it involves a lot. There's a lot that goes into all the ceremonies they do, and they do it daily, in some cases 3 times a day. So on one hand, it may seem onerous to consider the amount of time that they spend doing that, as well as the percentage of their income that goes toward that. But here's the benefit that I saw. And this by no means is a way of saying I'm all for it and we should do that too. I'm not going there at all, so please don't get ahead of me. Where I'm going is, this is how they do it, and this is what I saw, the benefits of how they live their lives there in that sort of a practice. And it's a combination, a lot of Hindu influence there, a lot of Buddhism, a combination of Hinduism and Buddhism, some Tao as well. And then there's even a heavy influence of Muslim mosques that have woven into the fabric of that society too. Probably for every one mosque, there were at least 10 Hindu-style temples. And every family had their own temple in their yard. If they lived in an apartment or a condo, there was a space that each apartment or condominium could have a mini temple. There was always incense burning. There were always fresh flowers and food items, including cigarettes, that apparently some of the gods enjoy tobacco, and they were offering those as well. But here were the benefits. The benefits were, in the 8 days I was there, I saw 2 police cars the entire time. I never actually saw a police officer. A couple of guys directing traffic, but the locations that we stayed with, the resorts we stayed at, in talking with the managers of the resorts that have lived there a while, they, for all practical purposes, say there just isn't any crime there. So, consider what it might be like to live somewhere where there just isn't any crime. The little crime that is there comes from the tourists. They bring their criminal minds with them, and it's usually disorderly conduct from some of the nightlife that's there in the major populated areas. So very, very family-oriented and community-oriented, very ceremony-oriented, lots of prayer, and smiles. Just happy, happy people all around. A lot of poverty, for sure. And in some cases, it was interesting to see how they go out of their way to take care of their temples in terms of cleanliness and keeping them fresh and up to date with gold-plated this and different things they put on them, where you might see a half acre of land in between a couple of the temples that's littered with plastic cups and baggies and just trash. So that was kind of interesting, that Mother Nature kind of took a back seat to the different temples that they took care of. So truth. So that was their truth in this is how we're living, and I found it fascinating that they are afraid of the ocean. So one of my hobbies is offshore fishing. So I spend a lot of time on the ocean, and it's a very spiritual place for me. There's a lot of life in the ocean. But they don't go out there. They are afraid of the ocean. Some of their gods, they believe, live in the ocean, and then some of their history involves being invaded by other peoples that obviously came from the ocean. So that was really interesting to talk with a couple of the young guys. I was asking them, because they were barely making a living as being tour guides to take us to see a waterfall or some of the different sites that we got to see, that I'm like, well, why don't you fish? You got some of the best fishing, because it's not fished out on the planet here. Some of the sport fishing that's done in their harbors by either Australians or Americans that are living there, it's some of the best out there, but you don't see any of the local population doing that, which could be quite lucrative for them. But again, it was their truth that that's dangerous, or that's something that they just couldn't do. So just fascinating. The whole thing was just one big, learning experience about how different people practice their truth. All right, I've rambled on long enough for an opener. Luke or Jim, do either of you have any counterpoints or thoughts that stimulate any brain cells that you want to jump in and point or counterpoint?
You haven't gone anywhere yet.
Okay.
We're waiting for you to go somewhere.
So to go somewhere?
I was in, well, you were in Bali the first week. I was in Maui the second week. And another interesting island experience. But interesting in a very different way, because it seems like in the islands there's this constant struggle for the people of the islands to find to try to stay in their truth amidst the only real truth in the island is tourism.
Yeah.
And so it's a really weird dichotomy to be in that energy, because where the locals have a very deeply entrenched and very deeply felt connection to the island and to the magic of the island and to the mysticism and that kind of stuff. But they're in direct opposition to what happens on the island all the time, and the disregard that they get to watch every day for their space and for their and just the amount of tension that the people are generally pretty lovely and but that you can definitely feel that tension all the time. My buddy that I was there with, not even a native guy, has been there a long time, but has struggles every day. Every day I was there was this sort of never-ending diatribe of how poorly the island gets treated,
mm-hmm.
and what that's about, and how it directly conflicts with the natives, and they just recently abolished cane sugar growing on Maui. So it's completely disrupting everything, and now trying to decide how that's going to work and what that's going to mean, and are they going to farm something else? But anyway, so it's just interesting, as you talk about being in foreign places and the truths of those places, it's kind of fascinating in that regard.
One of the things that Luke and I did earlier today is I'm still tracking on the topic of truth here, and I'm thinking of what it might be like to be 15 and living in our society, and wondering what truth is with role models such as our president and all the funky stuff that's going on in politics.
How did that get to be a role model?
Well, he is, whether we like it or not. It's not necessarily saying he's a good role model, but a role model nonetheless. Anyway, we were looking through the gubernatorial voters pamphlet today at the 20-something people that are running for governor. That election's taken place or at least the primary is in June. But as everybody knows, there's the party that the person represents is listed under their name, and then generally some occupation or some specialty that they have. And it was cracking us up to look at some of the people that have gone to the trouble of getting on the ballot, that they listed their occupation as bus driver. Can you remember a couple of the others that really stood out that we laughed at?
There was the recording artist.
Right. That was also a puppeteer. Right?
Yes.
It was puppeteer / recording artist.
There was the one that didn't have any occupation listed.
Right.
Parent.
Right.
I think those were the main ones there.
There was somebody that was a transhumanist lecturer. There was another one that was, teacher, artist. It was just things like, where are we going here? It's like, okay, interesting that.
What do you mean?
Well, that these, because they aren't. It's like this was for the governor of our state,
Mm-hmm.
that you could consider yourself a candidate because you're a puppeteer and a musician. And it's like, how does that translate to running a state?
Same way a reality star person becomes the president.
I know it's happened before for sure. Well, we saw that with Reagan, right?
We did. Although I think...
How about a bus driver?
Hmm.
You know, that one was a head scratcher.
But isn't that sort of isn't that the idea of the truth that was created for this country? Was that anyone who wanted to step up to serve, to help provide structure or guidance or direction could do that. That it wasn't about being limited to specific people with specific education in a specific way. It was about who has the passion to stand up and learn about this and learn about how these things are affecting people, and then hopefully affect change. Hopefully affect... Because, I don't know, maybe I'm crazy, but for me, in a lot of ways, the people that are living the life are experiencing the effects directly of what government does. More directly, I should say. So why wouldn't those people be the people to create the change? Part of the problem, I think, is because the people that are there have no connection to what's the impact that they create.
Yeah.
And they don't care.
Yeah.
And if they do care, that's a whole other conversation, but because that to me would make it even more egregious. But yeah, that you could start me down a whole trail of crazy here, because
Well, that's a great place to get to, the whole crazy thing, and what is that? And truth and crazy truth. We live in a crazy world.
Yeah.
Our politics is crazy.
well, it's very hard to find truth in it. What we would consider universal truth or capital T truth.
Mm-hmm.
Because everything that, it's interesting, because the viewpoint that you were kind of presenting, what was stimulating in me about that was we come from two very distinctly different backgrounds in education. You are very educated, and I am semi-educated in the sense of traditional
Mm-hmm.
structural education. But I think it's fascinating in some regard because, like everything else, it appears, education is no longer about educating anyone. It's about money. It's about entrainment. But I don't know that it's necessarily about educating, particularly lower level education. That's all about entrainment.
Mm-hmm.
We want you to have the viewpoint of what we want you to have the viewpoint of, and we're going to train that into you until you get it, so that when you become an adult, you'll file in line and do the right thing.
Right.
Then you'll spend, your $100,000 to get more educated, so that you can offer something. And what we're seeing is more and more how many of the let's see, we're what, we can count the Gen Ys, the Gen X's. Some of the millennials are starting to get there, right? Graduating? Are millennials turning that corner yet? I don't know. But bottom line is they leave with a piece of paper that is worthless. They can't get a job in the field that they went in. They don't ever get a job in the field they went in. It'd be interesting to do a formal survey of how many people actually work in the field that they spent $100,000 to get certified in.
Mm-hmm.
And so that becomes another layer in the job market. It becomes a layer in promotions. It becomes a layer in all of it, that it's all designed to funnel people into a specific path. So you don't get to really have those options unless you choose not to engage in that story. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So tying that back to where you started, which was these interesting individuals who are plumbers and bus drivers, that want to run the country or want to even run the state. I think it'd be fun to compare and contrast. What's Jerry Brown's background, and what has he done, and who was he before he was governor?
Yeah.
And what did he bring to the table, and what has he brought to the table? And I don't mean that I'm looking at that purely from a humanistic perspective, not a political perspective.
Mm-hmm.
We could spend hours and days and weeks and months going over all that nonsense, but it's driven deeper.
Right.
So,
one of the truths that I learned a decade ago or so that might correlate to politics and what we're talking about right now as far as truth in politics, which I think that's an oxymoron, the word truth and politics.
Yes. Politics is about perspective.
There was a time when I worked as a therapist at a large church in North San Diego County, and I was kind of like I was on the inside circle of the staff that ran the church, and the senior pastor had a deal where he met all the new members each week, and the elders of the church. This is about a 5,000 member church, so pretty big size group of people. And one of the truths was, out of 5,000 members, there might have been 10 people in the church that, through their tithes and offering, accounted for 90% of the collections. So that church was really being run for the 10 major contributors. I don't know what the numbers would be. Take 10 into 5,000, but it's a tiny amount. And in order to capture the attention of these 10 large monthly or weekly donors, the senior pastor occasionally took them to lunch and had them over to his house. And so these folks had, really large houses and drove really nice cars and went to really nice places for their vacation. And what the senior pastor learned over his time of being a senior pastor was, in order for these people to listen to you, you have to drive a car like they drive. You have to live in a house like they live in, and you have to be able to, in conversation, say, oh, guess what? I was in Bali last week, for example, for them to have an ability to relate to you. So that church, and the mission of the church was, get more people to come to church and get them to accept Jesus as their Savior and get them to heaven. That was the mission of the church, and they knew to be able to do that, they needed to have a nice building and a nice venue and a great message and great state-of-the-art multimedia. That has nothing to do with your relationship with your Creator,
right?
But that was the business side of that. And so that was a truth that prior to having that experience I was completely unaware of. But particularly because the senior pastor really didn't like living in that nice of a house, driving that nice of a car, and taking those kinds of vacations, because at the same time he was connecting with the major contributors, he was also distancing himself from the average person. And the average person would look at the car he's driving going, you don't need my $10, each week, right? Because you're driving a Jaguar. Why do you need my $10, right? You're living in that great house. Why do you need... We're paying you too much, was kind of... So there's like that balance between, who you're really... how it all works.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to believe in politics it's somewhat the same, that just conversationally you have to have some of these experiences. Like, who's going to listen to the bus driver? Unless that guy somehow was just naturally smart. But if he was, why is he a bus driver? You know what I'm saying? It's like, who's going to listen to the bus driver? And I don't even know the guy. Maybe he's the smartest bus driver that ever drove a bus. Maybe he recently retired as the Fortune 500 CEO, and now he wants to drive a bus, and he got bored of that, so now he wants to be the governor. I don't know. But that's why I was making a point that,
Well, so do you find that even for yourself that's true? That if the candidate was a bus driver, that he would not be effective or had the potential to not be as effective?
Well, I would know within a few minutes by listening to him talk. You'd figure it out real quickly whether or not he was literally a bus driver, and that's probably all he really could be, or is he capable of understanding the machinations that go into running a state? And can he rub elbows with the other governors in the country? Will he be invited to the red tie or black tie and red carpet affairs in the White House? Or will he be asked to drive the bus? Anyway, not saying that there's no benefit to having that. To me, I think you're talking about like Napoleon's corporal. Have you ever heard that?
Mm-hmm.
So Napoleon, the guy that went throughout Europe, when he wrote his mission orders and his battle orders, he had a corporal that he read them to prior to briefing his generals. And his idea was, if my corporal understands these orders, then the generals will understand them. And there was a significant gap between the corporals and the generals. So there's this term of Napoleon's corporal would be somebody that if you get it, then I'm pretty sure everybody else can get it too. I don't know if that was a segue too far off in the deep end. But Luke gets it. There's a big difference between a corporal and a general, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. But would you also agree maybe that corporals probably aren't ready to step up and do a general's job?
Most likely.
Yeah, that'd be a tough one to do. All right, let's get back to truth, or get back to a little bit more organized plan of what we were thinking about doing. Is there enough light here, Luke, that you could read question number 13?
Yes.
Do you have it looks like Jim has a thought first before we dive in.
There's something that I feel like we need to flesh out with this.
Okay.
Before we
Good.
move on. Sorry.
So we did go somewhere.
We did.
Okay.
And it actually speaks a lot to truth. But maybe it's about maybe diving a little more deeply into how we define truth. Because it's, and I think we even touched on this briefly last time. But the idea of how is truth defined, because I don't think you can. Truth in and of itself can't have multiple faces, because then it's no longer truth; it's opinion, or it's viewpoint, or it's perspective.
Right.
So, how do we define, and what are we defining as truth? Because in the context of our conversation, there was a lot of perspective, there was a lot of assessment, but I wasn't necessarily experiencing truth in that. So I'm trying to, because I'm thinking about this, the plumber is the plumber is as the governor, and I'm not disagreeing that what you were saying was accurate, but I'm thinking in terms of, I saw I think it was a video on YouTube that was addressing a similar I hate it when that happens. It was addressing a similar idea, but they were talking about what were they talking about? I lost it.
It's all right.
So anyway, so there was something about this idea of what are people, what is it that people hold as truth? If you think in terms of, if we use the parallel of the plumber and the governor, looking at the parallel of the man that was elected president is now president, basically a plumber becoming a president. Just because he had money didn't make him any better than anybody else, but educationally, the way he presents himself, that's a plumber. And you know what I mean? It's like, actually, it's probably an insult to plumbers, but not meant to be. But what's the truth that drives that? Because the reality of that situation is that he has money, which is why he got elected. He has money and he has, quote, business experience, quote. And that was the source of what supposedly created this election bent because he was going to create change,
Right?
right? So it sort of flies in the face of your point of the plumber becoming governor, because on the largest possible scale, it's already occurred.
I'm with you.
So how do we define truth? What is the truth that underlies that we're trying to get to? Is it, as we were going through these questions, is fear the truth? Are people so afraid of standing in their own truth that they're willing to sacrifice their truth for an opinion, for a viewpoint? How often do we sacrifice truth for an opinion or a viewpoint or a perspective? That doesn't serve that. I'm pulling out our quiz because I want to see if there's some tie-ins to some of the questions we've already answered.
A counterpoint or a response to the plumber being our president or something like that. Largely what our president seems to be a genius of, in some ways he appears to be a buffoon, but he is the president. Therefore, there has to be some genius in how he got there. And what a lot of people say is he is a genius in self-promotion. He's a genius in creating labels like Bad Hillary or Criminal Hillary or some of these other two-word definitions. So he labels things, and it's catchy. And so he's a marketer, and he's a promoter. And he did the beauty pageants. He promoted that. He built these buildings in New York and promoted that. And he got people to buy into what he was selling. So he's a great salesman, great self-promoter. Somehow people thought that he might be a good leader. And fortunately, as the president, you're not coming up with the ideas. He's pitched ideas on we should do this or we should do that, and he sees where the popular opinion is, I guess, and kind of moves in that direction. So in that regard, I really don't know what the qualifications are to be a governor or a president. But let's talk about, if we could, making a similar comparison. Having been in the military and been an infantryman, starting out as an infantryman, which is one of the most basic jobs that anyone can do. If you can put a pack on your back, a helmet on your head, you're fairly decent with pointing a rifle in a direction and making the bullets hit close enough to the bullseye, you're an infantryman. But I also got to be a fighter pilot and stick around, and so you cannot say that every infantryman could fly a fighter jet. Absolutely could not do that.
True.
So there are some, though, that because they wanted to do that, and however they became an infantryman, they then became a sniper and did some other things and got some education and kept going and had the drive to do all that to the end. That the group of guys that I hung out with that were flying fighters were in no way, shape, or form comparable to the guys I was hanging out with when I was a sniper or when I was in the infantry. Completely different group, but yet I was the same guy. I got to travel that path, right? But so it's just interesting. There are certain requirements that you have to have, intelligence-wise and eyesight-wise and physical size and all that, to be able to fly a fighter, and the brain to actually stay up with the jet and make all those decisions and not scare yourself to death. So I don't know, but none of that, I don't think any of that transfers directly to being the president or the governor.
True.
And hey, you just said the word true. We're talking about truth.
Well, yeah, and that was, I think, I was noticing that there were things that you were saying that resonate as truth. That there's the infantryman and a fighter pilot. One does not extrapolate to the other. That's a truth.
So that's how I could say a bus driver isn't cut out to be a governor. That I'm just stereotyping. But if, let's say, I was the bus driver and wanted to become a governor, that there are some people who could travel that path.
Yes.
And who could do that. So, but by and large, I don't think that that's very common.
I don't know that. I can't answer to that only because I don't know what other people have traveled in that regard. I mean, you know, like the Hillarys of the world, yeah, she's another extremely educated, you know, person. At least as I understand, not just from... So how do we tie that back to truth? So we tie that back to truth in that...
Well, Luke, if we go back to the discussion you and I had when I said, hey, listen to the occupations of these people running for governor. Did that surprise you? I mean, what was your impression? If I said there's 20 people that are running for governor, and what do you think their backgrounds are? What did you have in your mind? What was your truth about who they would be rather than who they actually were?
Well, usually when you think of like governor or something like that, you think of political background, or at least something along those lines where, you know, you kind of work your way up to it. You don't just make the jump from bus driver to governor. So that's kind of the first thing that came to my brain when you said one of them was a bus driver or parent or things like that, or nothing. So, yeah.
So it was surprising.
Definitely.
Yeah. Law school professor, maybe judge, lawyer, business, Fortune 500 CEO, somebody, those kinds of credentials. Yeah, so interesting. Well, I think we've played around with that as much as I feel led to continue. So why don't we dive into the questions?
Mm-hmm.
You ready?
Sure.
13.
Number 13, yes.
I have always gotten what I needed when I needed it.
Okay. So I don't know, have you ever heard that statement before? Put that way?
Something close to along those lines, yeah.
Okay. So to give you some of the background, since you weren't here last week and haven't seen this before, is what are the key words in that statement?
Always and needed.
Okay, nice. So we're defining need as the true things like oxygen and food and really the most basic things, not even a shelter, because there are homeless people without a shelter tonight that, according to that statement, they don't need it. And the reality is they're alive the next day, so they made it through the night with what they had. They got what they needed for that night, for that time, in this moment, in this now, right?
Yes.
So in the discussions we've had previously, it's hard sometimes to consider that I've always gotten what I've needed and that I have what I need right now. Most people say, no, there was a time when I needed this or I needed that, and I needed better parents. I needed, needed somebody to pay my rent. I got evicted. And so we would call those things wants, right? Yeah, it looked like you were going to say it before I said it. So we get our wants and our needs mixed up quite frequently. And people spend a lot of time being upset when they think that something that they need is actually a want, or vice versa. I should have said it the other way. When it's really a want, but they think it's a need, people are upset by that. And when you actually think the thought, I have what I need now, I've always gotten what I've needed, and I will continue to get what I need, when that becomes a truth, the reality, you can't refute it, because if a person is able to breathe and they're able to even think this through this conversation we're having, the fact is that even if they don't have arms and legs or even have eyes, if they had somebody read the question to them, if they can actually consider the question, they've gotten what they've needed in order to just be able to consider the question. Any thoughts about that? Is it simple enough? If somebody asked you, was there ever a time in your life when you didn't get what you needed? If you hadn't had this background that we're talking about right now, wouldn't it kind of seem like you'd say, yeah, I needed this and I didn't have it? It seemed kind of normal to let your mind take you in that direction, that there was something I didn't get when I needed it. But that's actually never happened.
Well, it's interesting. the more we dive into this, it's almost, what I keep seeing is this, that when it's attached to need, if there's need going on, it's typically a way of keeping, it's a bit of a disempowering place to be, because need assumes that someone or something has to provide you with what it is you think you're supposed to have. Because in no case that I can think of that you've addressed need has it the only place it can ever go is, my parents didn't do what I needed.
Mm-hmm.
This one, my relationship didn't give me what I needed. So my work job doesn't give me what I need. It's all tied to the blame cycle. It's all tied to responsibility is over there, not in here. But when you recognize that you're taken care of, that's a whole different place to be.
Yeah, certainly I think the preponderance would be an outside source. Even if you made it like the universe didn't provide what I needed.
That's still them,
right?
Us versus
but
them.
There are times when I've gone somewhere and I forgot something and I run the line, oh, I need this and I don't have it. And it was just all on me. But the reality is it wasn't a need, it was a want. If I'm still breathing and I'm able to think that thought, then it was just a want. We get what we need, period. However it comes, whether it's self-provided or other-provided, needs just show up. They always do.
I got my words backward in that context. I think. But the point was still the same.
Okay. Let's do the next one.
If I need something, it will come to me exactly when I need it.
Yeah. Only exactly. Byron Katie used an example. Yeah. Well, let's say like tomorrow morning we're going to have breakfast here on the boat, and there's some breakfast cereal and some other things in there, and we're going to go to make breakfast, and it's already here, right? So whatever's not here we don't need. There may not be some milk. Maybe we'll eat cereal with water tomorrow morning. Or maybe you'll say, Dad, I don't want to do that. Let's go get some burritos over there at the store. But it's already there. So a lot of things are already in place when we go to use them. It isn't like a seagull is going to fly over and drop off a half a gallon of milk for us or something, although that could happen. But the thing that's interesting is that sometimes we can't see the things that we need being here yet, and sometimes they are in just the nick of time or in the last minute. I needed a life flight there. I needed a helicopter to come get me out of the desert, and it wasn't there when I started my race. It arrived after somebody said, help, we need a helicopter, and it showed up. So I know Byron Katie talked about the concept, if you really need something, it will show up when you need it. Otherwise, you just don't have to worry about it. And so many of us do worry about, can I pay the rent at the end of the month, or will I have enough money to pay my taxes at the end of the year, or will this car continue to limp along that it'll, I can't afford to do this or that right now. And yeah, it will. It works. And if you can't afford the car, then I guess you're riding the bus or a bike or walking or Uber or something. But yeah, needs do show up when we need them. I like to ask people, was there ever a time in your life where you really needed something and it didn't show up? And everybody wants to say yes. It's almost like we're programmed to argue with this concept, and it's hilarious just to listen to the answers that people come up with, and they really believe they didn't get what they needed. And I'm like, well, then how are you here right now? And then the many, many stories of people truly getting rescued, or truly the nick of time, or just when they really did need it, there it was. And it's like, oh, where'd that come from? Some cool stories like that. But that question is largely written to, we don't have to worry and be anxious what we need will show up when we need it. It's a cool concept. If you put that as a truth, again, these are what seem to be big T truths, and you start programming yourself to think these things and practice it and live it, be mindful, life gets a little bit more enjoyable.
Well, part of that is getting out of your own way. You know, the resistance that many humans and many of us put into place in that need-want framework. We don't trust that we are always taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
So that lack of trust causes people to be in do mode and act mode and control mode in order to manage their experience rather than allowing their experience. And so their experience of not having what they want or need a lot of times is driven from the fact that they were in the way of. But again, it comes back to that responsibility piece. It comes back to the truth of our own experiences. If you know rent's coming up, then you can allow the space for that's going to be fine and be in the space of that, which ties into all the things that much of spiritual focus is and conscious awareness is about.
Right.
Is just know that it's going to be there and just go about the business of living your life and filling your space with joy and filling your space with things that lift your energy.
Right.
And stuff shows up. But if you spend all of your time narrowed into that little dot of existence and put all your intention and effort into that, and then all your doing goes to that, you've just now completely reduced the amount of potential and possibility in your world because you have one focus. So now it's all about you and making it happen rather than allowing for all of the creative components to come into play.
Sure.
And allowing for the other 7.5 billion people that exist on this planet that co-create together, that come together, that can help to have those things come together. Because in my experience, crap does fall out of the sky.
Yeah.
I say that metaphorically, but it's really, I could go on a litany of those experiences.
Well, sure.
On a daily, weekly, monthly basis.
Well, if you walk around this dock, Jim, you'll find these white dots all over the place where crap does fall out of the sky.
That's right.
It's all over the boats and the docks.
Did you invite him?
All
right, let's do the next question.
Except for the day I die, there will never be there will never come a time when I won't get what I need.
Yeah, I had a lot of fun writing that question because I wanted to take it to the extreme.
One more time.
Except for the day I die, there will never come a time when I won't get what I need.
And some may even debate that as...
I was going to say, assuming death is not what you
exactly.
need.
It's like, or why is that a problem?
Right.
For some of us, death is a day to celebrate, and it's like, hey, I'm done. It's graduation day. Let's get on with whatever's next, and could be a good thing. But for people who are concerned about death and thinking that it's not a good thing, we all have to... the truth is we all are going to die. That seems to be a big T truth.
Mm-hmm.
Some Christians may believe they're going to get raptured, and that certainly would be beyond the scope of this conversation. But assuming that that doesn't happen in our lifetime, we are all going to die. There will be a day when our heart doesn't beat again and we don't take a breath. But up until that moment, God, the universe, us, however it all works, will continue to have things show up that we call needs, that we don't have to worry about it. We just don't have to worry about it.
So I hear our audience asking this question. I'm going to blame
I saw a few hands out there,
the
too.
audience. So, talking about truth with regard to wants and needs, how do you tie or Because what you're saying, I think, from our perspective, almost seems like a foregone conclusion. Because we, in our own experience, have come to a place of realizing within our own experience how powerful that is.
Mm-hmm.
But for the people who aren't quite there or are trying to find their way through that path, what's the truth that drives that understanding? Is there a truth that drives that understanding?
Can you define that, please?
That is, you always have what you need. Or the clarity between the wants and the needs. The clarity between, there has to be for someone to get to that place where they can be comfortable in the idea of knowing that, you were using the example of in Christianity, the rapture, the likelihood, and I don't mean this in any judgmental way, but it's sort of back to the plumber conversation. The likelihood of someone who believes that is their truth is very unlikely to come to the truth of understanding wants versus needs. Because if they're over here and believing in the rapture that someday soon, this is all going to be taken care of and we're all going to be, lifted to heaven and all that's a truth that doesn't exist in the space of wants and need and understanding wants and needs. Does that make sense?
Yes, and it might be an audience that isn't even listening, so I don't know that we need to even go there. I was just tossing that out as a possible exception.
It was more. It struck me that there's because this is all formatted about truth.
Mm-hmm.
So it just strikes me that in order for someone to get to that, particularly, because death is such a big deal for so many,
mm-hmm.
that there has to be an underlying truth or understanding that helps people to be in that understanding comfortably,
mm-hmm.
naturally. Now, whether we can define that or not, I don't know.
So the intent of that question is to help people go, I'm gonna die. I am gonna die.
Right.
And between now and then, my needs are gonna get met.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean, we were talking a few moments ago about anxiety of, is my rent going to get paid,
mm-hmm.
right? So if month after month somebody's got lots of anxiety about their rent getting paid, I would say you need to make more money, or you need to move to where that's not something showing up for you every month, because you're living somewhere beyond your ability, and unless you're waiting for winning the lottery or something, that's just not how this thing works. You're living beyond, or not willing to do enough to live peacefully where you're living.
So that's a basic truth, right?
I would think so.
A basic truth to self.
Mm-hmm.
A basic understanding of the truth of the circumstance.
Right. So if you say I need my rent paid, I'd say why? If it doesn't get paid, that means you're not supposed to live there. That's not a need. That's just a want.
Such a great way to say it. You can't pay your rent, you shouldn't be living there.
Yeah.
So it's really, but that's the truth of, yeah.
And that's what a lot of people won't admit. There's a book I read not long ago where the guy was describing this lady wants a BMW. She's driving a Honda. She wants a BMW. The difference is it would require her to work an extra hour a day every day that she doesn't want to do. So she has to agree, I may want the BMW, but I'm not willing to do the work it takes to get it, so I gotta just accept my Honda and let the whole BMW thing go. I'd rather not work. I'd rather take that hour to meditate or walk or relax or do nothing, watch TV. That's more important to me, but people won't admit that. It's like they want that, the cake and eat it too thing. So, anyway, let's bounce to the next one.
If something does not happen for me, then I do not need it to happen now.
In a previous podcast, we defined now, because each of these questions have key words in them. defined now as an experience of 8 seconds. And that we bounce from one experience of 8 seconds to the next. And if you want to hear more about that, listen to a couple of the past podcasts, and we go into great detail on describing the science behind that. So can you read the question again, please, Luke?
If something does not happen for me, then I do not need it to happen now.
Yeah. May want it to, but the reality is, if I really thought this thing was supposed to happen, and I really, was excited about it and looking forward to it, and it's not showing up, then that's the universe's way of saying, not now. Doesn't mean no. It just means not now. Sometimes I like to use the analogy of if you were a parent and you took your 3-year-old kid to Baskin Robbins and they were so excited to go get their ice cream, and you as a parent knew that 1 scoop was going to be more than adequate to fill them up, and 2 scoops would be a mess, and 3 scoops would be insanity and just a waste, and they wanted 3 different flavors and a scoop of each one, and the 3-year-old is now throwing a temper tantrum. I want an ice cream, I want 3 scoops. What 3-year-olds can do that. If the parent and the universe or God analogy would be a good time for the parent to say, no, we came here for ice cream, and 1 scoop is what I had in mind to provide and you to have the experience with. You're not ready for 2 scoops. You're certainly not ready for 3 scoops. And if there's no gratitude or appreciation here, you're sure the heck not getting 3 scoops on my dime, right? So the universe or God would really do it the same way. The bus driver isn't ready to become governor yet. You might have to be lieutenant governor first. You might have to do whatever. I don't know. I kind of played with that a little bit. Sorry. Couldn't help myself.
Yeah.
But could we agree that it would be bad parenting to grant the request or the insistence of the 3-year-old for the 3 scoops of ice cream? Because you're then setting a precedent that all I got to do is have a temper tantrum and it's going to show up for me. And I haven't seen that the universe works that way.
Not ever. That I've ever, not in my experience.
When it does, it turns out people like Charlie Sheen or Paris Hilton, where they just expect it, and when they don't get it, they let everybody know they're really miserable. And I hope if anybody knows those 2 people that I'm not picking on them. I'm just using them as examples because they've made themselves such easy targets to be examples. And Luke's going, who are those people?
That's the guy from 2.5 Men.
Oh, you do know?
Yeah.
Do you know anything about his personal life? You heard anything about him in TMZ or any of those other...
Winning.
Yeah.
Winning came from him.
Oh, that's the phrase that came from him? Yeah.
Oh, among many others.
Yeah.
You were talking about how the parent knew that the child wasn't ready for 3 scoops and they were somehow insisting that they were. We ask a question when the young Marines go up for promotion board, what are you going to do if we promote you to corporal or whatever it is? And they say, oh, well, I'll start taking charge and things like that. And then we ask them, why aren't they doing that now? And then it all comes back to, I forgot where I was going with this. I had it all planned out and it was really good. And I just totally...
It is really good. Just stay with it.
Yeah. It's a great analogy.
It is.
It was, but it just comes back to them as a person not wanting to take the steps now to get what they want later, with the BMW and the working the extra hour every day.
Yeah. As if we put that extra stripe on your sleeve, all of a sudden, then you'll be ready to step into this leadership role. It's like, no, it's not the stripe on your sleeve. It's you right now, right? Yeah. Yeah. Good example. Jim's thinking. I see the wheels turning.
Yeah, there's I'm trying to pull on this differentiation. There's one school of thought that basically we're here to experience and enjoy this playground, right? That's all we're here for. Then, layered on that are all of the cultural, religious, spiritual stuff that's layered on top of that about how we do what we do or what we do, whether it's going the school route or whether it's going whatever route it is. So what I'm sifting through is this difference between. I love the analogy with the BMW and the idea that so she has to work another hour a day to make that happen. But that doesn't preclude her ability to have that car. That's a way to have the car.
Right.
But it doesn't preclude her having the car. But it still speaks to the similar thing of getting out of the way. Is, okay, so you want this car, you're not willing to take the steps in this direction to create that car, so what steps are you willing to take to create that car? How is that going to show up in your world?
Yeah, like a boyfriend who just wants to give it to you.
Whatever.
Yeah,
because there are unlimited possibilities for how anything can show up. It's just a question of what's your focus, what's your intention. I like that. It really makes me smile. This idea of so you have to work an extra hour a day, and no, you don't want to do that. I don't want to plant the message that it doesn't mean you can't have what you want.
Right.
It's just one avenue. If you're going to do I'm going to have this route, then there are ways you have to go about it. If you're going to become a governor, you can potentially create the intention for that and allow everything to unfold that takes you on the course to that, or you can set a course and you can go that direction. And people have done it from both directions.
Absolutely.
It just depends on what your willingness is to allow for all possibility instead of one limited, narrow possibility.
Agreed. Somehow we wound up talking about want, and that was a spinoff from need.
Well, the words have been being interchanged a little bit in our conversation since the beginning. That's why I made that comment earlier that I said I think I picked the wrong words in the wrong place, because I was originally thinking we were, and then you started talking and you reversed them again. Wait a second. Wait, we were talking about needs, want, wants, needs, want. Anyway, it's funny.
As long as we're on that notion, if you're at 31 flavors and you're licking ice cream, you needed it. And the universe said, here you go. This is your reward. This is your treat. This is your playground. But there are times when if you said, oh, well, the universe gave it to me yesterday, it's going to give it to me again today. That may not be true.
It may not be true. And when that happens, you get there and you spill the ice cream on yourself, or you taste it and you go, this is disgusting. Or, there are lots of ways that shows up too.
Yeah. What's the next one, Luke?
If I do not get something that I think I really need, then I do not really need it now.
This is funny. It's like we're almost somehow going to the next one before we get there. Can you think of an example of that, Luke, from some of the discussion we've had up to now? Think about the promotion board. Sometimes you have to tell people no, right? Doesn't mean they can't ever be a corporal, but it might mean let's wait to the next promotion board, right? So we want to see that you're acting like a corporal now.
We do that. They pass the board and everything, but their promotion is put on hold until we see them step up or show us that they're taking the steps towards it. So, I guess that kind of ties back into the question.
Yeah, there was, and I was going to reference it earlier and forgot, so I'll do it now. In Byron Katie's book, Loving What Is, she talked about one of her daughters at a point in her life was a drug addict, and as a mom, she worried about her quite a lot, living out on the streets. And at times, she just really wanted a hug from her daughter to know that her daughter was okay. And what she learned over time was if she really needed a hug from her daughter would just walk in the door and there she would be, and she would get her hug. And the times when she thought she really needed it and her daughter didn't walk through the door and there was no way to contact her or drive around and find her, she had to come to terms with, I just really don't need it right now. That was her definition of want and need. That there was a time when things were so overwhelming and somehow the need was just granted and it just showed up. Because that's so random. It's like, how would you know when your living on the street drug addict daughter was actually ever going to come home and give you a hug or not? And again, that was kind of her beginning awareness into this whole thing between want and need. So there are times when we really think we're going to need something and it doesn't show up. And that's the way that we learn to, I don't need it now.
Well, so interesting, because it still ties back to what we were talking about before about that need. This is the need-want thing, or whichever one we're talking about. That what drives, at least on the surface, when you think about that story, what drives the I need a hug is something outside of herself. Whether it's driven by, the idea of outside of self, the idea of the emotional content that was causing this need to connect, which is probably based in some negative emotion directed at self, about the person being in that condition, especially because it's a child, that stimulates that. It's the same the same place of differentiation is that the want is when you're trying to determine based on the question. Can you read the question again?
If I do not get something that I think I really need, then I do not really need it now.
Yeah, so the need is driven on the emotional life, on the emotional life of the individual and all of whatever's going on there. And that's how we get in the way of what we want.
I like where I have a sense of you going, Jim, with the idea of internal versus external granting of needs, or how that shows up. Because in reality, we don't need anything. We really don't need anything external to show up for us. We don't.
That's the truth.
Just like there really is nothing to forgive. That's a whole nother conversation for another time.
Yes.
So there really is no need, and there really is nothing to forgive. But we'll get there.
Yeah.
But I like how I see you kind of driving toward that right now.
Good stuff. All right, brother.
The more upset I become about something, the more I realize my story is upsetting me.
Oh,
bull crap. Still speaks to the same what we were just talking about.
Yeah. So what do you think story means by that, Luke?
Well, like your life, what you've done and what you're going to continue to do, and whatever you think should be upsetting you. And then, just like if you keep saying you're sick, you're going to get sick. And if you keep saying something is upsetting you, eventually it's going to actually start upsetting you.
Okay. Or if your story was, I really need this right now. I have to have this. This has to happen. If it doesn't, it means this, that, and the other thing. That's what we call story. It's just this story that we're telling ourselves. We're all telling ourselves a story. We're writing a story all the time. And what's interesting is I'm the only one who can write my story. You're the only one who can write your story. I can't write your story. I can say things. Like earlier I said some kind things about you. You can either choose to believe those or not. And some people have such a low self-esteem and self-worth, it doesn't matter how many nice things you say about them. They don't believe it, and they can't receive it because it's not part of their story, right? So I got lost in all of that. The question had something to do with, can you read it again, please?
The more upset I become about something, the more I realize my story is upsetting me.
Yeah, it is. It is. And again, Jim has pointed to we want the blame to be out there, outside of self. We want it to be someone else's fault, something else's fault, instead of simply going, you know what? If I am upset, I got myself here. Mm-hmm. I'm in a relationship I shouldn't be in, a job I shouldn't be in, a situation I shouldn't be in, and I'm telling myself all these things are what I need, or I have to have these things, and I can't be happy any other way. And the universe is saying, really? Are you sure? How do you feel about that? How's that working out for you? That's my favorite one. Mm-hmm. And how's that working out for you right now?
That was a Dr. Philism.
Yeah, our story. We have some great stories.
So the idea of story is that it's the thing that you know, the voice in your head that talks to you all the time? It's not the quiet one that kind of has a clarity to it. It's the other one that just does this all the time. There is, over the context of, or over the arc of one's experience, we come up with how we got to where we are. And that's what story is. Story is the stuff we make up about how we ended up where we are. And usually it's blaming someone else or something else or some circumstance, or I was in a car accident and my back is this and my this is that and my this is that, and therefore I can't. Or therefore I can. You know, I always pick crazy people to be in relationships with, because the last 3 relationships were X, Y, and Z, and this one threw things, and that one talked dirty to me, and that one was mean to me, and therefore I can't have a successful relationship. That's the story. So we spend a lot of time unraveling in us adults. Well, you're pretty close to there, but unraveling those farcical stories. They can be pretty interesting, too.
Sometimes I find myself using this idea when I describe it to people. If you imagined walking to school or walking to work or walking somewhere on a regular basis, and that there was a mean dog that you encountered each day, and the mean dog had been abused and had never been loved, and it was going to continue being a mean dog. That was a given. It just wasn't ever going to come over and wag its tail and lick your hand and, you know, let you pet it. Then your story would be, that dog shouldn't do that. That dog shouldn't chase me. That dog shouldn't bark at me. Someone should put that dog inside. That's story. Instead of saying, I need to find a different way to walk to school, because the mean dog's going to continue being the mean dog. The solution isn't someone do something with that dog. The solution isn't that dog has to change. The solution is, if I don't like this, I got to be the solution. And then I won't be upset.
And even more so, I have the power and the ability to affect a better way.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of ties into the next question.
No way.
Shocker.
Are you
Actually,
sure?
perfectly.
Only perfectly, huh?
If action is required by someone else to solve my problems, then that is not a good solution. It could not be worded more perfectly to go in with that.
I wonder how that happened.
I think we're proving out your test. Do you feel validated now?
I do, yeah. So I love that one so much, because we've been taught to think that if I have a problem, someone else has to solve it for me. And even though it's my problem, and the someone else may not see what I see as a problem, that's where it gets really funny. Is oftentimes when I'm working with couples or parents, and one of them is telling me of something negative about the other one, And the other one is like, well, yeah, I could see why that would be a little bit upsetting, but it's not nearly as upsetting to me as it is to you. And then in that moment, I'm like, well, I wonder whose problem it really is. It's like, if you think that he's the one that's causing it, and he doesn't see it as a problem, how likely is he going to be the one to help you fix it? It just isn't going to happen. So whose problem is it?
But if he loved me.
Yeah, we hear that a lot too. You know, is that really love? Is that really love? I would say no.
Absolutely
I would
not.
say it's showing up exactly the way that it should be for the lessons to be learned that need to be learned there.
Yeah.
And it would be like giving the screaming kid 3 scoops of ice cream. It's just not a good thing to do for everybody else to change to solve my problem. Can you read the question again, Luke?
If action is required by someone else to solve my problems, then it's not a good solution.
Yeah, it's nice, I suppose, in a playful, irresponsible, childish world. But in a real world, I really have to be the one. And honestly, it never was a problem to begin with. It was just something that it's part of our story. We're saying we shouldn't be encountering this right now. This should not be happening right now. It's like, why? It's an angry dog. Why? If the dog is an angry dog, it's always going to be an angry. At least for now, it's still an angry dog. Maybe next week it won't be, but
Well, and the other key point is it's angry with you. It may not be angry at you, but it's definitely angry with you. So regardless of whether it's an angry dog all the time really has zero relevance.
Yep.
It's angry when it's with you.
Yep.
So you
Yep.
want to change that situation.
Yep.
But yeah, I mean this is not speaking to the idea that there are solutions that may require someone's assistance. That's a different thing altogether. I mean, like, if I need a new Social Security card, I'm going to need the assistance of someone at the Social Security Administration to assist me to get that card. But I got to show up there to get the card.
I think you do.
I have to do all the legwork to get. They're going to do their part when I do my part.
Right.
When I bring my energy to the stage, then they can contribute their energy to support my energy. So it's still true, ultimately, because you're bringing. If you don't show up energetically, you're not going to get resolution regardless of who you think is supposed to fix it.
Right.
But you got to show up, whether it's in a relationship. If it's a relationship, then you got to be willing to show up by way of communication or by way of engagement that can bring light to whatever it is you're trying to understand within the context of the relationship. And it may require some support. You know, maybe I'm dealing with I'm going through a tough period, so I'm kind of all over the place. Well, that still speaks truth, because in order for me to be supported, I have to show up in my own experience and say, I need support. I need space. I need, or not even I need. I'm in a funky place. I'm just letting you know. So it's not about you. Same. You're still doing the same thing. You're showing up in it, and then you can enroll supportive energies in it.
Right. There was a lady I was speaking with today on the phone. That's one of my patients, and one of the things that happens regularly in our phone sessions is she starts complaining about the state of our political system and how messed up it is and how things should be so different than it is. And she's too busy working, making money to sustain the lifestyle that she wants to actually get politically involved. And I keep telling her, then the universe has to keep saying no to that. It's going to continue to be the exact same way for you until you do something differently. And telling me that you're pissed off about it isn't enough to actually, because I'm not going to do anything with that. I'm not getting politically active. I don't have any political contacts. There's no action that's going to take place that's going to make it any different for you when you complain to me about it. Nothing changes. And it has to be this way because that's how we got here. We're here now, so it can't be any other way than it is. right now in this moment.
Mm-hmm.
And it will be exactly this way next week if you don't actually form some grassroots movement to change it. It just is going to be this way. We can have the same conversation again next week if you want to. It's getting kind of boring to me. I'd like to see you, either come to peace with it. Like, I'm glad I have the ability to make the money that I make. I work hard, and I'm too busy running my business to actually go out and be politically active. So you just kind of have to accept what shows up if you're not going to be a part of that process, right? You absolutely have to accept it. Expect nothing, accept everything. The way that it is, unless you want to get involved and change it, unless you have the power to get involved and change it.
Well, and there's also, I actually wonder if I think I had this conversation with my brother at one point. Again, you have to be willing to tell yourself the truth about the situation. The situation is what it is. Does it actually affect you, or are you affecting you by your viewpoint of how you see that?
Right.
Right? So is anything that's happening in Washington, D.C. having impact on your life today? Has it had any impact on your life in the past week? Has it had any impact on your life in the past year? Other than the choices and decisions that you've made about it that you're now choosing to feel miserable about.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of recognizing that that's their world and that's their thing, and it just so happens that because we live in a time where, we have all of the social media and the news, the 24-hour news cycles, and all of those things that put all that crap in our faces instantly instead of, 10 years ago even, 12, 15 years ago, it would take a week to hear anything.
Right.
You didn't hear stuff the minute it happened. You'd hear a week or 2 weeks later that it happened.
Sure.
And so you'd go, wow, that was really sad. That was really whatever. And you close the paper and you move on. You didn't waste a lot of energy.
Right.
Now, because it's in your face so much, it's affecting me. Well, what's affecting you is the fear stimulation, and what's also affecting you is your viewpoint of it, not the reality of what it is. Because what he's doing there, I still have, on the Facebook today, I found a post that I really liked, and it reflected a comment about being the president of the United States, like fulfilling that role, and had this response about, well, check your, what's that thing, the 401k.
Mm-hmm.
Check your 401k and get back to me, as a way of saying all the things that he's doing are really wonderful.
Right.
I'm like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, okay, your whole life revolves around your 401k?
For some people,
okay,
it does.
Good for you. I'm glad that it's working.
And if that's up, then it's all good.
But the idea that, my brother and I got in this conversation about, well, this and that and this and that and what the previous administration did, and then I'm like, yeah, but when was the last time you made a decision because of what they're doing? Like, when have you actually made a decision that was a direct result of what happened in Washington about your life? Because I've sat here for the past half an hour, I can't find one. And I keep looking back and looking back. Now, maybe it'd be different if I was in a different industry, if I was an investor, or if I was, maybe there would be some difference. I don't know. But from my perspective, I go, and I say this to people all the time. How is it affecting you? Other than in your head. Did somebody show up at your door? Did your bank account suddenly go empty? Did the government raid your bank account?
Yeah.
What happened?
Yeah.
Did they come to your job and say you suck? What happened that you have this viewpoint that you can't get past? Because nothing has occurred in your world that has anything to do with that viewpoint.
Yeah, very little. And if it did impact, it would probably be fairly minimal. If it was raising taxes, if it was passing a new law or something like that, it's something that you can absorb and just deal with is probably in one of the categories of really not that big of a deal. And there might be some exceptions to
Some
that.
exceptions,
but
sure.
our Constitution's hopefully going to continue to be what it is. And we'll continue to run the country within those guidelines, and we'll see.
Or not, and then then we have an opportunity to respond to that.
Yeah.
Or
And
react.
even, you hear a lot about a lot of people will say how embarrassing it is to be an American in the world's eyes with regard to how our politics is run, and it's looked at like we have a clown as our president, and it's embarrassing. Well, when's the last time you've been to a dinner party with a Korean who told you, "Oh, you're an American," and it's like, when does that actually happen? It's just a story that we're telling ourselves,
Yeah.
right? Really? Is it? It's only embarrassing if you actually think that you've experienced that, and it's a concept, and it's not real.
Well, and like so many things that have been brought into the light since this whole transition, it just speaks to the different types of fear and the different types of stuff that people put their attention on that don't have any relevance to their, there's an attachment to feeling that feeling, or there's a, I lost my way again.
That's all right. That is all right.
We'll come back. What was the last thing you were saying?
I don't know. I think something about it's not real. We're talking about political embarrassment and just making up stories and that sort of thing.
Yeah, because different people respond to different stuff. So there's like multiple threads going on. There's the embarrassment thread, which appeals to those people that are all, image driven.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the image driven people have that one to play with. And then there's there are the fear driven people who are going to be focused on lack of money, or more money or less money, or not enough money, or whatever the case may be, depending on what choices are made. And so it's almost, you were talking earlier about the brilliance of being able to be a good salesman,
Mm-hmm.
and
Right.
focus energy in a particular fashion to stir people up. And I think that's one of the things that happens is the one thing he does seem to have a good grip on is how to stir this pot. And
Yep.
go over here and stir this pot, and go over here and stir this pot. Even though every story is completely contradictory, it doesn't matter. They all believe it. It's crazy. Anyway.
Did we get through the quiz, Luke?
We're the next question will be question 20 of 25.
Seriously? Wow.
Yes.
We got to move on. Okay.
Most of the things I see as problems really aren't, or not as big as my story tells me they are.
Okay. We've kind of already hit that. We've kind of already hit that one. Yeah. Yeah, we do a lot of embellishment in our mind and exaggerations and
Because we think it'll get us what we need.
yeah.
I tell a good enough story. If I'm the 3-year-old that can... Because it doesn't change, does it, in your experience? The 3-year-old screaming about the 3 scoops of ice cream is the same as the 28-year-old who's having a fit about whatever it is.
Right.
Generally, it's looking like the 3-year-old not getting the ice cream, but they're now,
Right.
20
Right.
years old.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes when people come into the office and they'll present a problem, I'll say a great example. Byron Katie went into a woman's hospital room and said, "I'm here to see you. Somebody told me you have a problem and I wanted to see if I could help you resolve it." And she throws back the cover, and like one of her legs is twice as big as the other leg due to some infection or something like that. And Byron Katie says, I can see that one leg is bigger than the other one, but I really don't see the problem. And she's like, very indignantly, "What do you mean? If they don't fix this, they're going to have to amputate." And she's like, yeah, I could see that would be an inconvenience, and you'd have to get used to it. And by the way, there's a whole bunch of people on the planet that have done that, and they've moved on with their life. I just don't see how this is a problem. She goes, wow, you're really callous and cold. And she's like, no, you've just told yourself that this is so much bigger than it is. And I'm not saying that having a leg amputated wouldn't be in the category of a big problem, but 5 years later, it's not the problem you thought it was at the time, right? It's just like, you don't know how to do that yet. Right. You don't know how to live life with one leg, but you will. You're going to actually become an expert at it. And at that point, it won't be a problem. So you could actually say, it's not a problem now. If at the end point it's not a problem, it was actually never a problem. It was just, I don't know how to do this. So oftentimes the problem is, I don't know how to do this, which is very comforting, because it's like, well, you're going to get a chance to learn how to do this. I promise that will happen. And that's kind of fun to get to walk people through that. Let's push to the next one, sir.
I would be no better off or happier if I were with someone else.
I love that one. Most people think they would be better off or happier at some point in their relationship if they could eat that grass that they think is greener on the other side of the fence. Can you read the question one more time, please?
I would be no better off or happier if I were with someone else.
Okay, so it's kind of a two-parter, the way I wrote it. The first part is I would be no better off, because it would assume that you could be, and you can't be any other place than you actually are. So we're constantly telling ourselves there's all these scenarios that we come up with. I could be over there. I could be with that person. I could do this. I could do that. No, you can actually only be where you are right now in this moment in time. So that's why it's a funny thought process to guide people through, is that those are all fantasies and imaginations. The reality is you can only be with the person that you're with right now. And the divine process that brought you to this point in time with this person is that there are specific lessons that this person is your teacher. They are here to teach you. Even if it's to not be with this kind of person in the future, you got to this moment to learn that from this person. And that's not to say that you now the light came on and you got it, that at that point you can release yourself from this relationship and move forward to not repeat it. But most people don't. They just bail. They bail before they learn the lesson, and then they just find somebody else to repeat it with, and there they go again. And I you can't prove or disprove this, but I wonder if sometimes people show up in multiple lifetimes just still churning on that same thing. That same concept may take more than one lifetime.
Oh yeah, I
to
definitely
work
agree
through
with that. Yeah, I mean it's especially with regard to relationship, and this is a tough one to hear sometimes. But because I can hear, well, that abusive relationship, I will be better when I'm out of that abusive relationship. He hits me, he treats me poorly, he does horrible things to me, or she does, whichever way it goes. And the reality of the now moment may be that it is an unpleasant place to be. But the only way it's going to change is when you, the person getting abused, takes the time to stop and go, why do I want this in my life? Why is this here?
Right.
Because it's not here for them, it's here for you.
Right. Yep.
And that's a really significant thing, but people want to jump on the bandwagon of being, you're a victim hater and you're a victim, what do they call that? Victim shaming. Victim shaming. That's what it's now. That's the latest one, is victim shaming. I'm like, do you understand that's an oxymoron? It's I mean, I guess you could victim shame if you really, but I'm not quite sure how you get there from here, because it's a process of, if it's in your life, you got to look at it. That's why it's in your life.
Exactly.
So, regardless of how unpleasant the thing is, I think it's where me and Byron Katie get along really, really well. As I see, that's how I look at life. Because I don't, like you were saying, I don't see a problem. I see a damaged leg that may not make it.
Right.
I see a learning curve. Don't see a problem. But yeah, it's
Yeah, and the moment that the person can see that it isn't a problem, then all of the other things that were possibly lining up to teach the same lesson don't need to be lived through.
exactly.
But if you believe that's a problem and you walk through it but you still see it as a problem, there's going to be something right behind it that's going to show up in a similar way to help that lesson
Continue
get
to
learned.
support it. Yep.
Yeah.
'Cause
And that's
it's
why nobody
always
else
about-
can solve those problems for us.
Back to number 20, 20 something.
Can you read that question one more time, Luke? I think it was a two-parter, and we only jumped on the first part.
I would be no better off or happier if I were with someone else.
Yeah. Because the likelihood of attracting similar dynamics would show up for sure within a short amount of time. You'd basically attract the same experience again.
Vibration is what vibration is.
So until we change,
From the physics perspective.
yeah, until we change,
This
it's-
vibration doesn't change until you change the vibration.
Mhm.
There's no, it doesn't matter. I could spit on it, I could throw things at it, I could jump up and down, and this vibration is not going to change until I change the vibration,
Right.
until I change the frequency.
right,
So if this is the vibration of abuse, then as long as I stay in the vibration of abuse, I'm going to be abused.
Mhm.
There's no two ways about it.
Mhm.
It's not rocket science, and it's not woo-woo. It's just the simple reality of vibration.
right.
So
So to write that question differently to where that could involve changing your partner, it would sound something like, when I look at the lessons that are in front of me right now, and I've changed, and I've dealt with these issues, this person is no longer going to be attracted to me. And the relationship, either all of a sudden they'll change, they'll have an epiphany, and they'll
Exactly
start
right.
showing up differently, and maybe then we can be together. But it would be a different relationship. The people may be the same, but it would be a different relationship.
yes. Yeah, because when you remove your resistance, when you remove all of the resistance that you bring by virtue of the belief system or by virtue of the vibration, it's going to stay there. It's
Yeah.
not going to go anywhere.
Another way of writing that question is, when I am happier, I will be with somebody else. And again, whether that's literally somebody else or that somebody you're with would then be somebody else because you're happier. Meaning that you've dealt with your stuff, or you're, gotten a little further down the road in life's lessons.
Mm-hmm.
We're ready for the next question, Luke.
The person I am with is the perfect one for me to learn what I need to know about my life.
Yeah. Over 25 years of doing this therapy thing, that is a big T truth for me. And when people come in and they want to take their relationships apart, and they're desperate to take their relationships apart, or they're thinking that if that other person doesn't change, and I beg them, just come on, work with me for 6 months, and you're going to see that it isn't the other person. It just isn't the other person that is the growth agent here, is sitting right in front of me right now. So that's really fascinating.
Yep. And none of that means that you should or need stay in an abusive or a relationship that doesn't serve. But the way out of that cycle is to change your vibration, is to change what you're creating from the inside out, so that you've now changed your point of attraction. You've changed your core vibration or frequency, so you're no longer resonating with that energy anymore. And that's what causes the change, because if you're here and you're doing this, if you go here and they go here, they no longer have a playing field, and you no longer have, this isn't happening anymore.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's but if you're doing this and you're doing this and then you do this and then they do this, it's the kind of conversation I've had in my relationships. Like, you don't have to do the things I do. You don't have to believe what I believe, but you got to stay in the ballpark if we're going to stay together.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we're here and here. and there's no relation between here and here. There's no common energy. There's no core vibrational alignment. It's just two ships.
Yep. Do we have another question ahead of us, Luke?
We have 3 more.
3 to go.
You keep adding some, don't you?
If things are exactly the way they should be, then things are perfect right now.
Another one that I love. I love this one.
You just love all of these, don't you?
I do. So I like talking about the difference between the two words of perfect and ideal. And they may seem synonymous. The way that this has worked well for me in looking at truth and in being at peace as much as I can be now, in this point of my life, I see everything as being perfect. Even the things that are painful, even the things that are hard, even the things that seem totally jacked up or messed up, including death and violence and all the stuff that we would call shadow or dark energy or all that stuff. Hitler, to me, served a perfect purpose.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people, I hope I didn't offend anybody right there. And if I did, I'm only going to say that if you really get into this stuff, at some point that'll make sense to you. And I'm not just asking you to drink the Kool-Aid here and get on board, because both Jim and I are nodding our heads up and down that makes sense to us.
Mm-hmm.
That there was a lot of good that came from all of that, what you might call evil or sinister behavior. There was a lot of good that came from that, and still is.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to get off on that point right now, but the idea of perfect, that we go from one moment of perfection to the next, to the next, to the next. But most of us have this idea of an ideal, meaning how we think things should be, the way we want them to be, rather than the way they are right now. But if you're on a spiritual path, at some point you're going to get to a place, hopefully, that you will see that there is divine energy and activity taking place, of which we are a big part of in choosing being on the planet at this point in time and being in these lives and in these families. And there is a lot of choice that went into where we are right now that we had direct involvement with, and that there's a lot of energy creating these scenarios that we call life, day to day to day. And they're all perfect. They're every one of them perfect. But they're far from what we would call ideal. We would think of ideal as utopia or nirvana or some place where, again, I'm going to reference the Bible, where the lamb lays down with the lion, meaning that the lion's not going to try to eat the lamb. It's like, well, wait a minute. It's in the DNA of a lion to eat a lamb, right? But so how could that even happen? But, it's in the book that there will come a point in time in that story that happens. And some of us want there to be no war any longer, and no famine, and no hunger, and all of those sorts of things. And maybe someday that will happen. But until it does, all of those challenges work toward helping us be more aware of others and less selfish and self-absorbed, and they serve a purpose. They're all here serving a purpose. Can you read the question one more time, Luke?
If things are exactly the way they should be, then things are perfect right now.
Yeah. So I like helping people get to a place where they can see that things can only be the way they are right now, based on everything that happened before. Everything that's where it is right now can only be where it is right now, based on the thousands of variables that went into everything that worked out the way that it did. Sometimes I go to my whiteboard and I pick up a group of dry erase markers and I hold them, shoulder high, and I drop them on the floor, and the way they bounce around and land and stay on the floor is really the only way they can be. They can't be any other way than the way that they landed and stayed, based on the height that I held them, the angle that I released them, just all of the little, even the arrangement that they were in when I picked them up has something to do with how they landed and stayed on the floor. But some people would say, well, I think they should all be pointing in the same direction, rather than, or I don't think any of them should be laying on top of each other, you know? Yeah, well, that's not fair that one rolled over there and is under the couch and doesn't have light shining on it. You know, I mean, you could go anywhere you want with all these notions of how that arrangement should have unfolded, but that is life. Boom, that's just how it is right now, and it can only be that way. And then people start to go, oh yeah, I do see how I think my mother-in-law should be facing that way. That pen represents my mother-in-law, and she should be nicer to me. And that pen represents my boss, and he should give me more money, or she should give me more. And right, we're doing that, and then the next thing you know, you've got all the pens pointing in the same direction, right? And it's like, well, wait a second, that's ideal. The way they were on the floor is real. That's perfect, because it can only be that way. And oh, by the way, that's tolerable. You're doing it. You're actually doing fine in that, and there's something to learn from that. And I could go on and on and on and on about this all night, but
well, so how does that unfold? You know, how the immediate thought I have is tying back to some of the things we've been talking about, which is you can affect change once you know where things are at.
mm-hmm.
So once you see how the lay of the land is, because you're showing up in your own experience and you're going, okay, that's how it is. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to see it different. I don't want to see the yellow one on the brown one. So how do I go about, from my perspective, which I have now? Because when you drop them, you now have a perspective that you didn't have before.
Right.
So did you take in all of the perspective, and is having that yellow one not on the brown one really what you want? Is that really going to serve your life, or is that just another story you're going to tell yourself about how good it's going to be if I do it otherwise?
Right.
You know?
And maybe you need to put that in motion and try it. Sometimes that's the only way you're going to know. So the idea is that you have to accept the arrangement of the pins on the floor forever and always.
Right.
You can interact to the degree that you have the ability to. And if you don't even like it, you could just leave the room. I don't want to look at it anymore.
Yeah.
You know.
But in responsibility to your own experience, in order to affect real change within the context of truth, within the context of having what you want, it's important to recognize it's not just about you dropped them. You're looking at the result, but if you lose that perspective, you're now no longer going to be able to impact the end result.
True.
Because the perspective is what's giving you the ability to make that change. Because you're saying, oh, now I see it from a different perspective. I see here, up here, it didn't look all that much. But when I see it here, oh, that one went all the way over there.
Right.
That's my job over there.
Right.
Why is my job all the way over there while the rest of my life is all the way over here? There's a lot of things you can, there's a lot of places that you can extrapolate in that potential. Which I think is cool. It's a more ways of seeing how we have the ability to affect change, but we have to be present with what shows up.
So the truth in this question is things can only be the way they are right now. Let's push to the next one.
Yes.
I'm exactly where I should be in life today.
Similar concept, a little bit different twist on it. As if we could be somewhere else.
Yeah, well, how could you be other than where you are? The only way that would happen is having made different choices, but you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of my favorites.
Right.
People are about, I could have been another.
Right.
But you're not.
So I don't remember if it was today or yesterday, we became aware that we were going to meet here rather than at Timothy's.
Mm-hmm.
And up till that point, I thought we were going to be meeting at Timothy's. And I could still here right now be thinking, we should be meeting at Timothy's tonight. We should be there rather
it's
than
not
here.
right that we're here.
Nevertheless,
Timothy's damn fault.
There was something that came up in his life that he's doing and enjoying, and we're like, okay, fine, we'll be here. But there, you could take that to a level to where some people just couldn't let it slide or let it flow and are thinking there's a problem that's negative, there's something wrong with it, and we got jacked up or ripped off, or we're the victim in some way, that we should really be there.
Yes.
And you can keep thinking that, and I'd just simply say, how's that working for you, right? Rather than having a good time where you are, rather than just going, oh, okay, I'm here right now, and if I really don't like it here, well, then now I know we need to find another location, or have another alternate, or something like that. Not a problem. I know that's a small inconvenience as opposed to some people, going through some harder challenges. It's just an example.
No, but I got to say that I think it's a very, very good example, because most people get hung up on those. The big stuff people tend to deal with a little more efficiently. At least in my experience, it's like if it's something bigger, but it's those little things that build up over time. It's those things that in our consciousness become the tangled knot of multicolored yarn, because we take 30 of those individual little situations and wind them into this big ball of crap about, I'm not loved and I'm not good enough now because Timothy couldn't see us tonight and we couldn't be at his house and we had to go somewhere else, and what did I do wrong, and why is it working out this way, and and it turns into whatever all your little stories are.
What do you mean my stories? Those are your stories.
I don't mean yours as in you. I mean,
I know.
Stories as
just
in
playing.
No. But it's so important to recognize that that's not an insignificant thought process. It's actually quite significant, because that's the thought process that runs your consciousness on an hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute basis. Because those are the things that just slide right in. Right, and so now you're myelinating all this new, this new stuff in the brain about stuff that doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm.
Wasting a lot of energy. Are we there yet?
Last one.
Woohoo!
Being upset gives me the opportunity to explore my fear about the situation.
One more time.
Being upset gives me the opportunity to explore my fear about the situation.
I had to throw a zinger in for the last one, and this is actually pretty deep, and it's really cool. So there's a concept in philosophy that anger, of which upset would be a category of anger, always sits on top of fear. It's one of those truths that we can throw that absolute out there. So being upset about something,
capital T,
gives me a chance to explore, whether it's a frustration level of upset or it's a rage level upset, it's still going to fall into that category of some cousin or synonym or relative of anger in some way.
Yep.
And underneath that, which people rarely go looking for, is some thought of fear. And we've had great discussion in the past about fear not being real. We did a great podcast one night about differentiating danger versus fear. And fear is, it's what's driving anything that has to do with being upset. There is some level of fear sitting underneath that.
Yep.
If we just give an example, perhaps the scenario I mentioned a few moments ago about having to change our location, and we've done that before, and guess what? We might have to do it again. And you know what? It's nothing to be afraid of. And some of the deeper fears could be, do we need to have 3 people every time? And does our audience, are we going to lose our audience if one of the 3 musketeers doesn't show up as much as the other 2? Those are unconscious, undeveloped thoughts that just sit there, and they're just in there. And then, when we bring them up into consciousness, then they're like, well, wow, I was really letting that have its way with me completely unnecessarily. Yep. And for example, if we were at Timothy's tonight, Who knows how much Luke would have been involved, or if he would have read the question. I mean, it would have been a completely different, maybe similar, but somewhat different, and it would have had a different feel and a different flavor. And obviously, if we go with all the other questions, this is exactly what was supposed to happen, what we're experiencing right now. And so the rest of that was just ideal, or maybe fantasy, or just expectation, or some combination of all of that. But there's certainly nothing to be upset about. Absolutely nothing to be upset about. And it's upset gives us the opportunity to then explore these hidden unconscious fears and expectations that are going on.
Definitely agree. There's I was trying to think if there was anything I can think of in my experience that doesn't translate that direction, and I haven't been able to find anything with regard to, the negative emotional response. Because the negative emotional response is predicated on some judgment of something. It's some assessment or some viewpoint of not enough, not good enough, not something. Is driving that response, because there isn't really anything. If you go back from the beginning of this test, as you go through all of it, is there's when you're in that conscious space, when you're in that awareness, when you're in that flow of love versus fear, there isn't anything to be afraid of.
Right.
It's just stuff that shows up in the field of your awareness, and you look at it and go, oh, okay, I got this situation, how do I want to handle it?
Right.
Left or right, up or down.
Right.
I got this over here. Am I going to go forwards or backwards? I got this over here. It's no longer an emotionally charged experience.
Right.
It's simply stuff that shows up, and you go, oh, okay, that's here. What do I do with that? What do I want to do with that? What do I need to do with that?
Luke, that example you gave 20 minutes ago or so of the Lance Corporal that was going up for the promotion board to become a corporal, and you determined that he wasn't quite ready yet. He probably had the ideal of, I'm going to get promoted today, or I'm going to get the thumbs up. So perhaps there was some level of that young person being upset. Can you go with me on that one? Maybe there's a little bit, maybe they didn't show it, but inside they might have been upset because they thought they were ready and the board said, you're not. So underneath the upset, could you see how maybe they had some fears going on? And what do you think a couple of those fears might have been?
I know one of the kids that we had, his grandpa's like super active as far as like staffing wise, so I know it was really tough for his grandpa to hear it, and like him especially not being able to meet the standard that his grandpa kind of set for him, that he really wanted him to get promoted, and then when it didn't happen that day, he was kind of disappointed. And so you can definitely tell that the kid was showing on him that there was the upset about it, and then the fear that grandpa is kind of disappointing me, and kind of what's going to happen now, what's next.
Right. Grandpa's going to write him out of the will. Grandpa's not going to love me anymore. Grandpa can't accept me anymore. And maybe Grandpa's fears were, my grandson doesn't have what it takes. He's not a chip off the old block. I can't be in this organization any longer and volunteer here if my grandson can't find his way to get promoted through the ranks. I mean, who knows? I'm making all those up. We don't know if any of those are valid fears or not. But there were probably 20 or 30 for everybody there. The board members could even be thinking, if we don't promote this kid, will he get unmotivated and quit the organization? I mean, there's that part of it too. And it's just fascinating when you dig into all that stuff, and it's like, hey, we just said you need to wait 3 months. What's the big deal about that? 3 months is nothing. 20 years from now, you're not even going to remember this. It'll be so insignificant. But that's how we work with the fears. we try to put them in perspective. It's like there's a reason for this. We're actually doing you a favor right now so that you don't embarrass yourself.
Well,
But
I think we're so entrained in the idea of not enoughness, just from the get-go. You know, that something like that automatically translates into not enoughness, when all that it's really translating into is you're almost there. You just need 2 or 3 more pieces to be there. You just aren't there yet. You know, as opposed to, and maybe there are some that will never get there. I mean, there are some that would, but hopefully, you know, is there a conversation about that kind of thing?
About them not getting there or them
Ever getting there?
There's some to this day that they've been in for 3-4 years and they're still trying to get there and they still haven't. But it's also, what was I going to say?
do you tell them that they can look forward to being a bus driver someday? Ouch. Maybe they're not cut out to be the governor. That was bad, huh? But that is reality. That is reality.
If more people were willing to tell that truth, you know, I have a fascination with reality singing shows. I do. I like watching the evolution. I like watching the transformation that people go through in that process. But it's fascinating to me, you know, because that's how Simon Cowell became Simon Cowell, because he was telling the truth. It's like, yeah, don't ever sing again. You know, and they're like, oh, how could you say that? Because they should never sing again.
Because they suck. Or at least not in public. Sing in the shower,
that's
right?
Keep that to yourself. But do you find in your experience that kind of truth shows up, or is it just a constant? Is there a point where you say, we just don't think you're cut out for this?
I mean, we've never gotten to the point where we say it to the kid or the parents or whatever, but, you know, everybody kind of has their thinking it, but at the same time, I mean, all 50 kids that are there, they all know that the one kid, they can all see it, but at the same time, we discussed a lot that, do we just tell them and then see if that truth motivates them? Us saying that you're not going to make it, they just reverse that and use it as motivation to work harder and, you know, practicing, and then next thing you know, a month later, they did a complete 180 and they're locked on and ready to go.
How often have you seen that?
We tried it and it actually surprisingly worked. But it's pretty cool to see the change that people do.
But I think that's awesome. But that speaks to the same thing we've been talking about all night. Is when you're presented with the current reality of what is, you have something you can go with from there. You know, like this kid who has failed and failed and failed, to finally be told the current truth of the situation, gave them a place to start from. Gave them a foundation to stand on and say, but wait, I don't believe that. He had to come to a place within himself that went, wait a second, that's not me. What is that? That these people would think I'm not enough? Unacceptable. And then consciousness shifts, energy changes, vibration changes. That person went from way down here to way up here really fast.
That goes back to what my dad was saying about only you can write your story, so who are you to let somebody else tell you how your story is going to go?
Right, because you don't know how many times those failures of that individual were because they were in somebody else's story. They were in Grandpa's story. They're living Grandpa's story instead of living their own. And then when somebody says, yeah, we don't think you're actually going to be cut out for this, they can go, wait a second. That's when they disconnect from that other consciousness and go, well, what's going on for me? What about me? I want to be here. And suddenly they find a whole new energy because they're now not living off the thread of their grandfather. I'm combining stories, I realize that. But they're not living off the thread of someone else's energy to be successful. They're finally stepping into their own. And that's a huge service that you do to people when you do that, I think.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just an extraordinary service.
A lot of us love those underdog to success stories. The movie Rudy.
Mm-hmm.
Have you seen the movie? Yeah, that's a great movie of the kid at Notre Dame, that scrawny little kid that shows up for every practice, and somehow he's on the team, and one day gets to actually play. There's a blind kid that's on a football team. I can't remember if it's college or pro. He's the snapper. And the coaches have made an agreement that the opposing guy isn't going to just can him. I mean, so there's a play that he's blind, and he snaps the ball. He hikes it through his legs to the kicker. And the coaches have made an agreement that they let this happen. And everybody's like jazzed about it. And in the draft this year, this is a great story. There's two brothers, they were twins, and one brother doesn't have a hand. He has a stump right here. And he was actually drafted to the Seattle Seahawks. So he's made it all the way through Pop Warner and high school and college, and his brother's a Seattle Seahawk, and now they've played on every team together. The brother that had the two hands is like, I'm not playing unless you agree to have him play too. He's really good. He just has one hand, but he can make up for it. And isn't that amazing? Like, he's the only player ever in the NFL to play that game with one hand. So the bus driver can become governor, I suppose, but
well, yeah, he can, but it's still going to require a learning curve. I mean, I think that's why it's important to recognize is that it is very possible for the plumber to become the governor, but the learning curve that will be required for that to happen is quite substantial.
Mm-hmm.
And if the person has the wherewithal and isn't attached to story, like, I'm a plumber, I'll never be a governor, then the likelihood is the potential is all there. Because if you embark on that, you may not be a lawyer who has gone, or come up through the system,
right?
But that doesn't mean you don't have the ability to learn and to expand what you know. But back to the story we just told, there has to come a point of reckoning with self that says, I'm biting off this, Big Mama. Am I ready for it? Because it's going to be a ride.
Yeah. I just had a vision of this bus driver being employed up in
plumber. He's a bus driver.
up in Sacramento or San Francisco, and he's driving a bus, and everybody that gets on the bus, he hands them a little thing that says, "Hey, I'm running for governor. Vote for me." And this is going to be the best bus ride you've ever had. Who knows? Who knows? Let's take 2 minutes, Luke, and run through each of the questions so we can kind of this is where we've been, and then we can put it to rest. You could start at the top and just read through them. By this point, the audience knows that the answers to every one of these questions is true, and hopefully we've given the dialogue in the background and all of the little nitnoid details that it makes sense now, that people, if they took this quiz, would be able to answer it and explain it as a true statement.
You want from number one, or just what we did today?
Yep.
Life is not fair. I do not need what everyone else has in order to be content.
Okay.
Since physical and emotional pain is always in the process of going away, I can handle it. I will be able to handle this troubling situation, fill in the blank, for as long as it's here. Anger sits on top of fear. That fear is being driven by something deeper going on inside me. Worry is believing I won't get what I need or won't be able to deal with some future event. If I am generally irritable, frustrated, resentful, or angry, my mind is focused in the past. If I am bored, worried, or anxious, my mind is focused on the future. My life would be no different if so-and-so treated me better. My problems would not go away if only so-and-so would change. When I am willing to explore my fears from the past, I will be less angry and more at peace. Things should be exactly the way they are now. I have what I need right now. I have always gotten what I needed when I needed it. If I need something, it'll come to me exactly when I need it. Except for the day I die, there will never come a time when I won't get what I need. If something does not happen for me, then I do not need it to happen now. If I do not get something that I think I really need, then I do not really need it now. The more upset I become about something, the more I realize my story is upsetting me. If action is required by someone else to solve my problems, then it is not a good solution. Most of the things that I see as problems really aren't, or are not as big as my story tells me they are. I would be no better off or happier if I were with someone else. The person I am with is perfect for me to learn what I need to know about life. If things are exactly the way they should be, then things are perfect right now. I am exactly where I should be in life today. Being upset gives me the opportunity to explore my fear about the situation.
Awesome. Thank you for reading those and being our narrator tonight. That was great.
You're welcome.
Do you have a sense, Jim, before we put a wrap on it, to hear all of those in order, or just to kind of hear them all? Did anything come up, resonate with you about that?
Interestingly enough, it was what I kept hearing was the same thing over and over again, but not in a bad way. I don't mean like it was repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the thread was the same.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just perspective and fleshing out what we as humans do to complicate our experience.
We do that well.
But yeah, and I thought that was kind of cool, actually. So I was going through, I'm like,
Alrighty. Well, our intention would be to pick up here next week and jump into the next quiz. Have a good time again.
Good stuff.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.